Before I get into this, Black Lives Matter. If you're watching this video, like me, you're probably conflicted on what the moral obligations are of photographers during protest. Like me, you may have seen some posts that ask you to blur or obscure the faces of protesters in order to protect their identities. And like me, you probably Googled the heck out of this topic to try to find some consensus. Before we get into the gray area, let's talk about the facts. In America, you do not have the right to privacy when you're in public. Anyone can take your photograph at any time for any use. We also have the right to assemble and freedom of the press. The First Amendment has us covered here. So to be clear, yes, you can photograph protests, you can post them, you do not have to obscure the faces of the people in the images, according to the law. A quick story for context. After attending a march in Atlanta on May 29th, I posted a couple dozen photos tagging the organizers of the march and some political leaders who spoke there. All of the images that I posted depicted peaceful protest, and everyone in the photos, except for the politicians and the organizers, had their face obscured by a mask. I even received a thank you from one of those politicians, including the hashtag ethicalphotography. Shortly after posting, I received a couple of DMs from someone not involved in the protest. They insisted that I remove the photos and blur the faces of the people in them if I intended on reposting them. They were convinced that the photos were putting protesters in danger of being doxxed or hunted down by right-wing extremists. This had me very conflicted on what to do. So I asked these folks to link me to an article or some other information to help me understand the basis of their belief. What I received were tweet threads from a few Twitter accounts, a Medium article from a photographer with a similar conflict as me, and reference to the mysterious deaths of activists who participated in the Black Lives Matter movement in Ferguson in 2014. After analyzing the tweets further, it became clear that the call to blur faces was directly related to Ferguson, so I kept digging. The 2014 riots in Ferguson began the day after 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot and killed by police. The shooting sparked a national debate about law enforcement and their use of deadly force against people of color. 6 activists had died since 2014, since participating in the protest. They've all died under various circumstances, but the original claim, and I'll read it, is that 6 of the most prominent activists during the Ferguson riots have all been found burned to death in their cars. Multiple news outlets have investigated this claim, and PolitiFact even breaks it down activist by activist. They found that some people involved in the Ferguson protests, or connected to people who were, did die since 2014, but not all of them were found burned to death in their cars. Some actually committed suicide, one was an accidental drowning, and another was a fentanyl overdose. The implied conspiracy theory was actually flagged as Facebook's efforts to combat misinformation on their platform. While 2 of the deaths were clearly murder, only one of the activists was featured prominently in social content. His name was Darren Seals. Darren Seals was featured in national media and was publicly outspoken on anti-police brutality and racial injustice. He, like other political leaders, chose to be publicly identifiable, but simply showing your face does not give anyone the right to murder you. Let's back up for a second. When I was first told that being identified in media coverage could lead to someone being doxxed or harmed, the first thing that I thought about was actually Charlottesville. In Charlottesville, unmasked white supremacists marched with torches through the streets, chanting hate and putting their alt-right, neo-Nazi, Klansman, Confederate, anti-American bullshit on full display for everyone to see. In the aftermath, media coverage and social posts of these racists were used to identify them and alert their employers. Wouldn't you want to know if you worked next to a Nazi? Clearly there was a benefit in this case to documenting the scene as is and not obscuring the faces of those involved. Doxing a Nazi is a good thing, and our lenses ultimately held people accountable to those racist beliefs. But let me tell you where I stand and what I believe is right for the cause. If you've never been to a protest, it's important to understand that people who don't want their face shown or to be identified make preparations so that they won't be. They bring face coverings and wear clothing to make it harder for law enforcement to identify them. But this isn't true for all, especially in a post-COVID-19 world. When the expression of the cause becomes destructive, many of the participants you photograph won't be identifiable. But for those who are, we can help protect them from prosecution. We can choose to obscure faces through composition or through post-production editing. If you're out on the street photographing a protest, you're likely a supporter or a member of the press. Press photos will not be blurred. News coverage will not be blurred. Participants' live streams on social media will not be blurred. And security cameras and body camera footage from law enforcement won't be blurred either. If participants choose to show their identities, there will be thousands of cameras to capture that, even when you exclude social posts. Our role as photographers in history has been to document the events that take place, from babies to battlefields. Be safe, and consider your composition when you encounter an unmasked protester standing atop a burning police car. If you're a white ally, our role should be to follow, not lead. Our role should be to serve the cause and stand between police and those we're trying to protect. Before pointing your lens or posting your photos, ask yourself if your photo is a positive contribution to the cause. As white allies, we should be pointing our lenses at police. These are the images that best help our movement. Thank you for watching this video, and if you have comments to share, please leave them below. Hate speech will be deleted.